As we begin, let me say a couple of things. We're going to go through the RFP. We're going to talk about the spreadsheet, but I wanted to let you know that we are recording this. It's our hope to place it on the website with the audio. It's our first attempt at doing that, so if that doesn't work out, we will at least place the PowerPoint on the website, including any questions and answers that are asked today. Please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. We are happy to go back to anything that you'd like to speak about, but we'll go through the presentation first and take questions at the end. As you know, we released about a week ago this RFP regarding the CRIZ acreage. The City of Bethlehem was awarded the CRIZ in 2013. We identified several projects, including a couple of Bethlehem Parking Authority projects that which we've determined are no longer feasible. There is approximately 1.3 acres that have been identified in relationship to this project. We expect to go through decertification, and the authority is expected to act on that in less than 2 weeks and receive state approval by the end of the calendar year for the decertification of those parcels. Many of you know what a CRIZ is, or I hope you think you know what a CRIZ is, but it is expected to provide economic development and job creation within the city. And we use local and state taxes that are generated as a result of the project to pay down debt service associated with the project. The focus of the program, and specifically in the City of Bethlehem, has been to revitalize downtowns, to take underutilized or undeveloped properties and give them an incentive for redevelopment. I'm sure I don't need to speak to the loss of tax revenue with the demise of Bethlehem Steel. But that has been a significant focus of our CRIZ parcels. Many of them are associated with that. And what we'd like to do is continue to evaluate projects that are going to grow the tax base. They're going to revitalize certain areas of the city and be beneficial to the residents and the visitors of the city. How do we do this? We take the CRIZ eligible taxes, which are listed on the sheet. You can find them in the Act, which is also an attachment to the RFP. The one thing I want to point out to you on this list is that earned income tax, while listed, is not highlighted because in the City of Bethlehem, the earned income tax is not coterminous, or the city and the school district are not coterminous, which means we cannot collect that tax. Every other tax listed there is eligible. The recent expansions included a couple of things, including some of the taxes paid by shareholders, the hotel occupancy tax, and the taxes associated with liquor. We were always able to collect the 6% sales tax, but we were not able to collect the 18% until the changes to the legislation were approved in July of this year. And so that is a big addition to the legislation. We're looking for qualified businesses. Qualified businesses are those that have that conduct an active trade or business in the zone, and they have to be appearing on the list that is filed with the Commonwealth on an annual basis. These entities are easiest to describe as new entities to the Commonwealth to maximize the benefit. So if there is a new business entity, whether it is a business that has moved in from another state or it's a new creation, that is considered a qualified business. If it is a business that has operations in the Commonwealth, the Department of Revenue is advocating for the creation of new LLCs or new business entities to give it a new business status. If that's not possible, those businesses have to operate for a year in the zone to establish a baseline, and that year is a calendar year. Once that occurs, any taxes that are remitted after that 1 year when the baseline has been established will be collectible. So that would be projects that are significant expansions, predominantly those that are significant expansions. The construction contractors are also considered eligible taxpayers, and so even if they're doing work in other areas of the city, they don't need to have new LLCs. It's a bit of an area that nobody had really thought about, but that was clarified in the legislation. So any construction that occurs in the zone, regardless of activity outside of the zone by that contractor, is collectible under the CRIZ. The baseline tax amount, which I mentioned, is only pertinent to those that are not new to Pennsylvania. And so if you, again, bring in a business that has an existing presence, that moves from an existing location and relocates, it will have to operate for a year before it establishes the baseline. We have compliance requirements, which are important. Without complying, we can't receive these taxes. And so we want to make sure that the entities we're working with in the new CRIZ designations understand that these projects are prevailing wage, that you have to use prevailing wage to be compliant with the construction of the projects. And there's an annual reporting. This is required by not just the tenants, but the property owners, assuming that they are a legitimate PA business. And those reports are due on an annual basis before June 15th. And then the funds are dispersed once a year. So this is not a program in which funds are received on a monthly basis. It is a program in which in November on an annual basis, the authority will have those funds dispersed based on the operations of the tenants and the businesses within the zone. So what's our timeline for CRIZ designation? We're having this meeting today with a deadline of November 30th. We will internally review the applications. I really can't tell you, because it is a self-imposed timeline, what exactly our dates will be. But what I envision is that we'll receive several good projects, and we will bring projects in for additional information. This is not simply what you submit as the beginning and the end of our evaluation process. We envision that once you submit, we will have lots of questions for you, and we'll bring you in either to hear presentations or work with you to gather additional information on your projects. It's our hope that we'll select a developer, and you see that we have started the project before designation of CRIZ. This is important. We've talked to the Department of Revenue. They understand our apprehension on designated land without knowing that this is a viable project. Once we designate a parcel, we have to have your permission to remove it. And so it gets a little tricky, but they're willing to be patient and work with us and understand that while we may publicly designate, we may say that this is where the project's going to go. If you don't start construction within a period of time, don't get land development approvals, don't seek permitting, that may change. And so if you are selected, you will have the confidence of working with us on the financing and on the land development and the permitting. But if that doesn't happen, we need the ability to reallocate this land somewhere else. So it's a bit of a fine line. I hope you understand, the way we're phrasing it. But what we want to make sure that we do is not lock ourselves into a project that then doesn't happen. So how are we going to review these projects? We have some criteria in the RFP, which is fairly self-explanatory. The general factors and city factors are what we're looking to see out of projects. Obviously we've got an awful lot of plans and goals. If you look on our website at the Department of Community and Economic Development, particularly under planning and zoning, there are a number of plans in which you can find lots of ways to comply with our goals as a city. There is very few areas of the city that doesn't have some analysis or some goal and objective and making improvements. And so I encourage you to be familiar with what those goals and objectives are and highlight that in your applications. We have factors that it relates to the private sector. We need to know that you're able to secure financing. We're not going to just take this blind leap of faith, but what is your project? Is it viable? Can we work with you to meet our compliance goals? And at the very end of the process, the Commonwealth needs to approve these projects. The projects that have been in the paper that you have read about have mostly been included in the application that was originally filed with the Commonwealth. But anytime we designate new land, we're going to need to make sure that the Commonwealth sees this as a good project, that it brings economic development to the Commonwealth, and it doesn't have a negative impact on neighboring communities. So while I don't foresee a challenge with getting their approval on most projects, they tend to take the lead of the city. It's an awareness that at the end of the day, they need to be okay with the project as well. Included an Excel spreadsheet, which I believe we provided an attachment to you. What I'd like to point out to you is there are a number of tabs, I think 5 of them all told. The first one is a lot of information, and please just give us the property address and the acreage and the parcel number and make it easy for us to identify where you're going to locate this project. We're very interested in identifying the footprint, the square footage of the buildings, because what we don't want to do is create parking lots and green spaces around the property, and so we're very much focused on just providing the CRIZ to maximize the overall city benefit for that portion of the project that is going to generate tax revenue. You can spend CRIZ dollars on ancillary things, streetscape improvements, on infrastructure, on parking, but you don't have to designate that land anymore. That was one of the changes we saw in July. And so it doesn't necessitate a different borrowing or a different cost to the project outside of CRIZ. It can all be included, but the ground under the portion that's generating taxes is really what we're looking to CRIZ. When you go through the list, if you have tenant information, please include it. Obviously, all the owner information, whether or not you've been through planning and land development, and whether or not you have any permits for your projects. All that information is important for us to know to gauge the readiness of the project. On the second tab, you see sources and uses of funding. We'd like to know if you have any other sources and uses. The CRIZ will allow or requires 20% equity into a project, but it will allow federal funds to be used as part of that equity. Even if you're receiving historic tax credit reimbursement, that still goes as a component of your project, but it has to be non-state dollars that are CRIZed. The CRIZ projects cannot include KIZ projects, so we would need to decertify anything that's in the existing KIZ zone, but we can address that with individual projects as they move forward. On the third tab is the construction estimates. What we want you guys to do is provide us with the overall numbers. We will back out the CRIZ benefit. What we don't want to see is you say, I'm going to generate $500,000 in CRIZ funds, and us have no idea how you're going to do that. So we very much are looking to break out the different numbers so that we can run those numbers. So we're comparing apples to apples in our projects. So for instance, we ask land acquisition costs, number of construction employees. We can, if given an average, we can understand what those CRIZ dollars will be. If there's various phases, please break these out into the different phases of the project. What we need to know is what is realistic in each phase. So if you have a 3-building project, we want to know what the timeline is for the first building and then the second and the third. That may make a change too on the way we award any kind of CRIZ designation. On the fourth tab, it's things like corporate net income tax, bank shares tax, and personal income tax for the shareholders or owners. That was new to the legislation. So again, we're looking at a 25-year schedule. It may be more, it may be less. While the term was a 30-year term, we are a couple of years into it at this point. Not that I would expect any borrowings to be that long, but at the end of the day, we're looking to see the impact of the project. The longer we can collect CRIZ, the more of a benefit to the Commonwealth. So even if you have a project and you're borrowing for a 6 or 8 year term, we may have the ability to refinance that and extend that out. We don't want to stop collection of the CRIZ by eliminating debt. And so a phase project can at times be considered very beneficial as well. And the last page is the operations estimate, employer withholding tax, sales and use, liquor tax, and so forth. If you look at a restaurant, for instance, you'll have a couple of different taxes there. You may not have any. Most of, or about half of these are state-related taxes, but I don't want to forget about the amusement tax, local services tax, and the business privilege tax, which are all local taxes for collection. So again, when you give us your numbers on these, then we will be able to help and identify the amount of CRIZ revenue that's generated. So that's pretty much it when it comes to the spreadsheet and the presentation. I'll take questions. Go ahead, Bruce.
Proposed assessment. One of the questions on the facility information is proposed assessment.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we were just interested, and it's a bit of a nosiness. I don't know that it's going to come into significant play, but we can usually, if it's not a alerted area, keep the entire property tax bill associated with it. And so that is one of those areas where the city, the county, and the school district don't need to give up taxes. It's just a point of understanding where we're at today, what we think the overall impact is going to be, and how that's going to benefit the city.
So are you looking for us to put that number in there?
Yes. Yeah, if you have any idea. Again, there will be blanks, and we understand that. We're okay with that. But we just, it was another item to include in helping to evaluate projects.
It's plucking a number out of it.
Could be. It could be. And if we have your project and somebody else's project that we're curious about, we're going to come back and ask you to justify it. Anyone else? Sean?
Just a clarification. Let's say you have a retail project, so the sales are going to take place on a retail floor, but obviously parking is instrumental to the retail.
Sure.
Are you saying that the parking area would likely be excluded from CRIZ designation?
Yeah, so what we're saying is you can take the CRIZ taxes that are generated to help construct the parking. So if if you're doing a borrowing, and that can be folded in as a cost associated with it, but there's really no tax generated from the parking area. And so while we can see it be a beneficiary of the CRIZ, it doesn't need to be included in the CRIZ district. So parking is considered infrastructure,
Okay.
and infrastructure doesn't have to receive ground designation anymore.
Okay. One other question. I just want to clarify something that I think you said.
Okay.
So let's say you have a company operating in the state of Pennsylvania today, and they're ABC company.
Yep.
Are you saying that the State Department of Revenue has in fact said, well, just create XYZ company and shift it over and then start your baseline from there?
They have said that a new corporate entity as defined under the Act is eligible for CRIZ inclusion. The scenario that you're talking about they have said it is exactly the way that CRIZ companies can benefit. Now, I caution you though, because if you're going to take businesses from one area of the city and move them to another, we've got to then deal with the loss of those businesses in the city. So it's not something I think you'll see us get as excited about. I think that the best case scenario is if you have ABC company operating in the Commonwealth and they want to acquire a property or do a project within the city and they want CRIZ designation, while it is certainly eligible would be eligible as an expansion project and receive the benefit. The state's going to look a little harder at that project to ensure that it is new furniture and fixtures, new employees, new activity. It may simply be easier to create a new LLC for the Bethlehem project and avoid the question of what's happening with that business. Are they picking up and moving, not creating the new LLC, and then would be forced to operate for the year? Or can we just create the new business entity, see the expansion occur, and easily deal with the situation? What else?
And just a quick clarification on baseline. Baseline is derived to exclude certain taxes to be used in the CRIZ area, correct?
Sure. So that is the example of if the Commonwealth doesn't want to lose any existing revenue. So they wanted us to establish the baseline. Let's take the Perkins that is currently included, and so that is part of the CRIZ. They operated for the year, they reported out and established a baseline because the Commonwealth always received those taxes. So their attitude was, why do we give them up? We wouldn't want to give them up. So that's the intention of the baseline, to make sure that they remain whole. There were some changes with the legislation. So let's say that a baseline business underperforms after operating for that first full calendar year. They no longer rely on the rest of the CRIZ projects to pay that deficit. Everybody gets zeroed out, or every underperforming baseline company gets zeroed out essentially, and so you don't have to make it up. But if you bring somebody in that picks up and moves in the same corporate structure that they are today, and then next week they pick up and move into the CRIZ, they need to operate from January till December in the CRIZ zone to report out their baseline.
Sounds counterintuitive, though. If you have a company that's extremely small,
Mm-hmm.
they need to grow into a much larger space. You're
Sure.
saying that they grow into this larger space and they create the baseline on their new business.
It was one of the trickinesses of the way the legislation was originally passed, and so the inclusion or the ability to create new corporate entities is a way to address what you're talking about. What else? Any questions about the spreadsheet or the information we're looking for? Okay, well, if you have additional questions as we move forward, Amy Burkott, who's sitting to my left here, her email address is included. We prefer to have them in writing because what we'll do is we'll post them to the website as we get questions that come in that are relating to the process, relating to the documents we release, to make sure that everybody receives the same information. Thank you.